Welcome. If you're just joining us, it is time for The World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. And with us, Christopher Dickey of Newsweek and The Daily Beast. How are you, sir? Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP, who soon will become benevolent overlord in Washington, from what I hear.
Good evening. That's right.
Congratulations. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph, and France 24's Annette Young. The World This Week, where you've been weighing in on the conversation all week long on Facebook, and you can join us as well on Twitter at FrançoisF24. It's been exactly 3 weeks since the Syrian army started shelling the city of Homs. For now, there doesn't appear to be any let-up in fighting. This Friday, the Red Cross negotiating a humanitarian truce. Up till now, that had fallen on deaf ears. A situation in Syria that was highlighted in the last story written by veteran journalist Mary Colvin for the Times of London. A gut-wrenching tale of ordinary citizens cowering under the shelling. She writes, a baby born in the basement last week looked as shell-shocked as her mother, who fled there when her family's single-story house was obliterated. We survived by miracle, she whispers. Fatima is so traumatized she cannot breastfeed, so the baby has been fed only sugar and water. There is no formula milk. Marie Colvin, who goes on to write in that piece, as international diplomats dither, the desperation in the Bab el-Amr neighborhoods grows. Annette Young will discuss the international implications of this a little bit later. You read that. It's hard to read that story.
It really is. And I think you and I were having a conversation earlier this week in the newsroom about the nature of this war and how it's become a YouTube war as such. And the fact of the matter is that while you've got a lot of citizen journalists running around with their mobiles, I think it took someone like Marie Colvin to go in there and to give it the perspective that was required. And sadly, it did become a game changer, whether we like it or not. The death of a Western journalist, somebody certainly of the calibre of Marie Colvin, has completely changed the nature of the international debate. And that is why we're seeing today in Tunis, things have changed. I mean, the West is ramping up its pressure as such. And again, it shows the need, and I don't say this lightly, as an older journalist, that the need for experienced senior journalists to cover those sort of conflicts in order to give the appropriate context and analysis.
What's chilling as well is that, Christopher Dickey, 1 week ago, you were sitting on this set. We were talking about the death of a veteran New York Times reporter, Anthony Shadid. He suffered an asthma attack trying to leave Syria. And now it's Marie Colvin.
Yeah. And they were two of the best in the business, really the best in the business in many ways. Certainly Marie was incredibly brave. She went more places, took more risks, got out more stories from harder places than anyone that I know. And Anthony was a great voice of reason writing in the New York Times, who would go and see things on the ground and say, this is what is really happening. And I think, and that's exactly right. You know, I think people trusted those voices because there was so much experience behind them. In these kinds of environments, it's hard to know who to trust. It's not that people who are sending out these videos are not experiencing the suffering that they're recording. They are, but we don't really know what their motivations are. We don't know who they're affiliated with. We don't really know anything about the people who are sending out those videos. When Marie or Anthony reported from the ground, we knew a lot about them and what they had seen and understood and represented. And that makes all the difference in the world. And it's a huge loss that both of them have died.
Anne-Elisabeth Moutet?
I knew Marie Colvin from the Sunday Times, where I used to work 20 years ago, and she always was this incredibly talented and fearless journalist. But the thing is, even if you didn't know who she was, even if you saw her for the first time on the report that she did 2 days before she died with Addison Cooper, or if you read a piece by her and you never read anything, or you were not even paying attention to the byline, when you read the piece made sense in a way that the fragmented snatches that you get through YouTube and the internet do not, because that's what a good journalist does, and that person makes sense. So you didn't need to know all this background, and the fact that she died is something that I must say has sort of hit me very hard. It's horrible.
Remy Ochlik, by the way, the French photojournalist, he was 28, but wise beyond his years. He just won a World Press Award for his coverage of the war in Libya. He was on assignment this time around for the French news magazine Paris Match. Dave Clark, the photographers at the French news agency AFP, must be in a state of shock as well, I suspect.
I think the industry's in shock. We've lost a lot of people in the past 18 months and 20 months, but the people of the Middle East have lost many more, and we're all shocked for Marie and for Remy and for the people we've got out there all wounded. I'm just hearing before I came on air that ambulances from the Syrian Red Crescent may have got to bring some of the wounded out, and hopefully we'll hear more about that. I hear more about that when we get off air. But what we have to remember in order to pay tribute to Marie's memory is that when those journalists are out, we don't forget the people of Homs.
And don't forget the people of Homs. And to get back to the point Annette made at the outset, late Tuesday we learned the death of Rami al-Sayed, who was the same age as Remy Ochlik, father of one, and one of those citizen journalists who the world has been relying on for images for the past year almost now. His footage uploaded to his YouTube channel, Syria Pioneer. And the news of his death, of Rami al-Sayed, has really stunned a lot of Syrians, Annette. It's been interesting this week talking to them. These people, they're in Homs, and they're not going anywhere.
They certainly are not. And as we were just saying earlier, the fact of the matter is, if those ambulances go in, I don't think they'll be happily agreeing to go out of the city, because they know what will greet them at the other end. And that being the secret police and security forces who will be pulling them out of those ambulances. I mean, and that's the point about Marie Colvin again. And because we had, over the last, few months, I think the story was becoming, I hate to say it, a little bit monotonous. I mean, every Friday after Friday prayers, there was a flare-up of violence. But what it has done in the last week or so is really narrowed the global perspective on what needs to be done. And again, the fact that we don't know how many people have died. I mean, back in January, the United Nations stopped counting because they can't verify those figures. And I suspect because there hasn't been any foreign media coverage of the type that's required in order to verify figures as such that we just see the tip of the iceberg.
All right, the Red Cross, by the way, telling France 24 that the evacuation of the wounded has begun inside of Syria. Another point I want to get back to is one that you mentioned is it takes a trusted voice, as you were saying, Christopher Dickey, for the West to pay attention. It's not just, by the way, the death of Marie Colvin and Remy Ochlik, but also as it waits on the fate of two of their colleagues hurt in the same bombing.
My name's Paul Conroy. I'm a photographer at the Sunday Times. Today's date is the 23rd of February 2012. I was wounded in a rocket attack yesterday, 3 large wounds to my leg.
Hello, I'm Edith Bouvier, French journalist on assignment in Syria with a group of journalists. Today is Thursday, the 23rd of February, and it's almost 3 in the afternoon.
Christopher, I've spoken to several photojournalists here in Paris, and there's at the same time, it's hard to see the images of people who are wounded and need help. On the other hand, there's this sort of wariness over the way the narrative is being described through official mouthpieces. The French president saying this was a deliberate attack. We don't know the circumstances. And a lot of people...
The French president who's running for re-election.
And a lot of people, a lot of those photojournalists alluding back to the bombing of the market in Sarajevo, which was a turning point which got Bill Clinton to commit the United States to help stop the war in Bosnia.
You know, honestly, François, I was listening to Annette talking about how this is a game changer. I don't think that the death of Marie or Remy or any of these people is a game changer, because the game is set up in such a way that the West is not going to do a damn thing to help the Syrian people. It's not going to get involved in a war on the ground to save those 28,000 people in the Bab al-Amr district. It's just not going to do it. It's not going to have any no-fly zones. If they create safe havens, which is what they're talking about, we know how great safe havens worked in Bosnia. Srebrenica was a safe haven. I don't want to sound cynical, but I don't think anything's going to change on the ground in Syria as a result of any of this. And so a lot of these pronouncements you hear, for instance, the ones from President Sarkozy, are pure and simple posturing because they can't be backed up by action. They won't be backed up by action.
The Red Cross ambulance is finally getting in. That is
to take out the Europeans. For the reasons that we're talking about, those people, the Syrians aren't going to get in those ambulances for exactly what Annette was talking about, for exactly that reason, because the secret police are going to drag them out of those ambulances when they get out of Bab al-Amr. The only people who are going to get out of there alive are going to be the Europeans.
All right, and with Russia and China reiterating their backing of the Assad regime, this Friday we saw a Friends of Syria meeting in Tunis. Turns out it's little more than a talk shop. The Qataris touting an Arab force. The Saudi foreign minister saying that arming the opposition is an excellent idea. That's a quote. Western allies, though, making it clear ahead of that meeting, Syria was not going to be Libya.
There is no military option at the moment on the table, and as I have said before, France could not envisage such an option without an international mandate. It's our clear and constant guideline.
Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, when you see how fractious and divided Syria's opposition is, do you think that makes sense what the French foreign minister says there?
I don't think that he's going to be instrumental in starting anything. I think the power in the region who possibly could do something, at least in terms of safe zones, is Turkey. If Turkey, which happens to be a Muslim country and therefore more acceptable from various factions, decides that it wants to pursue a policy that it has been thinking of for a long time, and decides to get involved in a kind of action to freeze the war in areas of Syria, that probably is the only solution. But I don't see the French going anywhere.
Oh, but that's not a solution.
No, it would halt. It would freeze things. It would be a good or bad thing. It's quite right. But at least there would be less killing.
Dave Clark?
I think Alain Juppé and William Hague are extremely lucky that Russia and China vetoed the motion. If for one moment China and Russia said, okay, form a coalition of the willing, we endorse whatever means necessary to halt this slaughter. How many divisions do we think Nicolas Sarkozy and Barack Obama could put together for that invasion? There won't be an invasion. There won't be a liberation. We're talking about Saudis and the Qataris supporting a Sunni rebellion on the ground. We're setting up a civil war between the Alawis and the Sunnis. It's not the first time in history that the Saudis and the Gulf states have sent money to jihadi fighters to fight a government backed by Moscow. This afternoon, there wasn't just a meeting in Tunis. There was a meeting in Cairo, and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas hailed the Syrian rebels. He called them heroes. He said they must overthrow the regime of Assad.
Well, and in fact, we have Al-Qaeda getting involved, and it's not just window dressing. I mean, for Ayman Zawahri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, this is a great opportunity because he essentially came out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the most dedicated fighters in Syria are former Muslim Brotherhood people who've been repressed ever since 1982 and before. And this is their golden chance. So there's all of these currents that are going on. It doesn't mean that the 28,000 people in Bab al-Amr are not innocent people being slaughtered by the government, but it does mean if you move in, you're going to get involved in a real nest of vipers.
But at the end of the day,
that's why we're not going to do it.
At the end of the day, the violence is not going to go away. And I mean, I think back, being an Australian, what I meant about it being a game changer in terms of once again refocusing global attention, because people had, basically were starting to forget about Syria. It was going back onto the back pages. I think of East Timor, where Clinton would say, we're not interested in that part of the world. In fact, Sandy Berger, the then National Security Advisor, says, America doesn't need to intervene. I don't need to intervene every time my daughter messes up her room at college. However, fast forward a number of months, thanks to the Australian media being present in East Timor and those images being beamed out of Indonesian militias hacking separatists to death, it became a different story with an Australian-led operation. I agree. It's
East
very
Timor,
messy.
I mean, come on.
East Timor is a long way from Syria. Syria is on the fault line of the Arab world. It's not Libya, which is on the periphery of the Arab world. It's a very different scenario.
And East Timor, there wasn't an army of 300 to 400,000 men either.
But at some point, something has to happen.
One final point on this, which is Kofi Annan being named by his successor, the
Mr.
UN Secretary General, to act as a mediator. Can he do something?
No, he can talk. His conscience may bother him because he was the head of UN peacekeeping when the peacekeepers abandoned Srebrenica and when they abandoned Rwanda. So his conscience may make him try and do more than he was able to do then, but whatever his conscience tells him, he still is not going to have any boots on the ground.
And Elisabeth Moutet, is there any way to get around the Russian veto? Because this is what it looks like, naming Kofi Annan when there has not been anything that's been resolved within the Security Council.
You know, the definition of madness is doing the same thing again and again and hoping for a different result. I think it would be madness to expect the UN to be of any use in this respect, because as we've seen before, they haven't. There was in the case of Rwanda, when Kofi Annan was actually in charge of all peacekeeping operations, the commander on the ground, a Canadian called Roméo Dallaire, an officer sent a fax which further afterwards was called the fax of the genocide, which predicted exactly what was going to happen, the arming of the Hutu militias, the radio 1000 Hills, calling to murder, and all of this. There was a blueprint that was perfectly well organized, and he filed about this, and he sent it to Kofi Annan, he sent it to people in New York. Did it give any kind of result? None whatsoever. Right. So trusting Kofi Annan on this one, I'm not.
They just blamed the international community.
Afterwards.
All right, when we come back in the world this week, we're going to look at the U.S. attempts a bit of fence mending with Pakistan, but the timing may be a little off, what with outrage over Quran burning at a U.S. military base in Afghanistan.